What principles were adopted for subsuming the indirect taxes under GST? Let us understand that various indirect taxes were subsumed under GST. The word used here is called subsumed. That is, those previous laws were taken over by GST. For example, central excise, service tax, octroi, entry tax, all these have been subsumed under GST. So what is the basis for subsuming these indirect taxes is the question. The various central, state and local levies were examined to identify the possibility of being subsumed under GST. So, what were the types of taxes that were subsumed under GST? The central taxes like central excise, service tax were subsumed under GST. The state taxes like VAT and entry tax were subsumed under GST. The local levies like entertainment tax, a portion of entertainment tax was subsumed under GST. So, various types of central, state and local levies were examined to identify the possibility of being subsumed under GST. They identified these levies and they examined them clearly so that whether it is possible to subsume under GST. Because there are some type of taxes which are not subsumed under GST. For example, road tax, stamp duties are all not subsumed under GST. So each and every taxes were analyzed to find out whether they could be subsumed under GST or not. So the local levies, state taxes and various central levies were examined first. While identifying, the following principles were kept in mind. Taxes or levies to be subsumed should be primarily in the nature of indirect taxes, either on the supply of goods or on the supply of services. First, the taxes which are being subsumed should be in the nature of indirect tax, because GST is also an indirect tax and the tax which is subsumed should be also a indirect tax. Taxes or levies to be subsumed should be primarily in the nature of indirect taxes. So it should not be a direct tax, it should be an indirect tax in nature. So the taxes which are subsumed are indirect taxes, either on the supply of goods or on supply of services. But they can be either be levied on goods or on supply of services. That was not a matter at all, but it should be in the nature of indirect taxes. That is first point. Next, taxes or levies to be subsumed should be part of the transaction chain which commences with import, manufacture, production of goods or provision of service at one end and the consumption of goods and services at the other. So what is that is, next is that the taxes or levies to be subsumed should be part of the transaction chain. So there are various kinds of transactions like importing of goods, manufacture of goods, production of goods, provision of services. So these are all the important transaction chains. For import of goods, manufacture, production of goods, provision of services. For import of goods or services, customs was levied. Then for manufacture, excise was levied. Production of goods and sale, VAT was levied. Provision of services, service tax was levied. So the taxes which are subsumed should be part of this transaction chain. So somewhere in this chain, that particular tax or levy should be a part. For example, entry tax. Entry tax is levied when the goods are being transported from one state to another. So it commences, it is in between a manufacture to the sale of goods. So right in between the manufacture to the production to the sale of goods, that particular entry tax is being levied. So the tax or levy to be subsumed should be part of the transaction chain which commences with import or manufacture or production of goods or provision of services at one end and the consumption of goods and services at the other. So in between this manufacture to consumption, or in between the production to consumption, in between the import to consumption, in between the provision of services to the consumption, somewhere in the chain, that particular tax which was subsumed should be a part. So one example was entry tax. Entry tax was levied when the goods are transported from one state to another. It is in between the manufacture to consumption. It is in between the production to consumption of goods. The subsumation should result in free flow of tax credit in intra and interstate level. This is very important. What happens was that there were various taxes which could not be used as a credit. For example, octroi tax which was paid in Maharashtra could not be used as a credit. So by a trader who is transporting goods, by a trader who is in Tamil Nadu. So what happens that there are various indirect taxes which cannot be claimed as credit. That was one problem. So when it is not claimed as a credit, what happens? It adds to the cost of production. So the government thought that the subsumption should result in free flow of tax credit in intra and interstate level. Not only within the state, but also in between the state also, there should be free flow of tax credit, and the subsumption should result in the free flow. So the government has analyzed various indirect taxes which upon subsumption will result in free flow of tax credit. That is why entry tax, octroi, VAT, all these have been subsumed. Because if it is not subsumed, then it would not be resulting in free flow of tax credit. The taxes, levies and fees that are not specifically related to supply of goods and services should not be subsumed under GST. This is the next condition. The taxes, the levies and fees that are not specifically related to supply of goods or services should not be subsumed under GST. Because under GST, the primary prima facie condition is supply of goods or services. So when particular tax or when particular levy or when a particular fees is not related to supply, then it should not be subsumed under GST. Next, revenue fairness for both the union and the states individually would need to be attempted. So this is the another criteria. Revenue fairness. There should be fairness in the revenue collected because of GST. Revenue fairness for both the union and the states individually would need to be attempted. Why? Because the subsumption is happening at both the center as well as state level. So with regard to states, various indirect taxes are subsumed. With regard to the center also, various indirect taxes are subsumed. So there should be fairness of allocation of the funds between the union and the state government. So what happens? Revenue fairness is an important criteria. So these are all the principles which are adopted for subsuming the indirect tax under GST. Which are the commodities proposed to be kept outside the purview of GST? Why is that some items are proposed to be kept outside GST? The government is very conscious that certain items as of now should not be coming under GST, and some items permanently should not come under GST. There are two types of decision which the government has taken. As of now, some items or some transactions should not come under GST, and some transactions permanently should not come under GST. First, Article 366 subsection 12A of the Constitution as amended by 101 First Constitutional Amendment Act 2016 defines goods and service tax as a tax on supply of goods or services or both. So goods and service tax means it is a tax which is levied both on goods as well as services. So it is a tax on supply. The word used here is supply of goods or services or both, except supply of alcoholic liquor for human consumption. So the first exception is alcoholic liquor for human consumption. As of now, alcoholic liquor for human consumption is within the control of each and every state. So alcoholic liquor for human consumption is one of the main revenue generating area for the states. So as of now, when the GST is being implemented, the most of the states were not ready to give up alcoholic liquor for human consumption to GST. Therefore, when GST is being implemented, supply of alcoholic liquor for human consumption is not within GST because the states have not given the consent. So, supply of alcoholic liquor for human consumption. Notice the word you use, supply of alcoholic liquor for human consumption, not for industrial consumption. In alcoholic liquor for human consumption is alone made out is outside the ambit of GST. So alcohol for human consumption is kept out of GST by way of definition of GST in Constitution. By defining the specifically that alcoholic liquor for human consumption is out of GST by way of definition in the Constitution itself. Next, 5 petroleum products. What are they? Petroleum crude, motor spirit, high-speed diesel, natural gas, aviation turbine fuel have temporarily been kept out. So let us understand that with regard to alcoholic liquor for human consumption, it is kept out of GST by way of definition in GST, whereas the 5 petroleum products like petroleum crude, motor spirit, high-speed diesel, natural gas and aviation turbine fuel ATF is temporarily kept out. So let us understand that in case of these 5 petroleum products, as of now, the taxes which are levied on all these 5 products are exceptionally high. So once these are brought into GST, we can expect a lowering in the rates of all these 5 petroleum products. But since this is since these 5 petroleum products are revenue generating lot of revenue for both the central as well as the state government, the government as of now decided that if it is suddenly, if all these 5 petroleum products are brought into GST sudden, all of a sudden, then it would cause a huge dent in the revenue of both the center as well as the state government. So as of now, temporarily it is kept out of GST. So I repeat, when the 5 petroleum products are brought into GST, we can expect a lower in price of all these 5 petroleum products, and this would therefore affect the revenue of central and state government, and central and state governments have decided that temporarily it should be kept out of GST, but in the future they will be brought into GST. So what is the ill benefit? What is the negative aspect if the 5 petroleum products are not brought into GST? So every business spends a substantial amount on petrol, diesel, natural gas, etc. So those kind of companies, those kind of businesses cannot take credit of all the taxes which they are spending on petrol, diesel, etc. So petroleum companies, oil companies suffer a lot because these 5 petroleum products are not brought into GST. And GST Council shall decide the date from which they shall be included in GST. So temporarily they are out of GST. So as and when the time proceeds, the GST Council will decide the date from which they can be included in GST. Next, furthermore, distribution and transmission of electricity. As of now, electricity is in the control of every state government. Every state government decides the rate of electricity. Distribution and transmission of electricity is also outside GST. Electricity duty is being levied by the state governments on the electricity. So GST is not levied on electricity. And sale and purchase of real estate also will be kept out of exemption. So real estate, construction of buildings is being, portion of it is being subsumed under GST. With regard to real estate, the sale and purchase of land is outside GST, whereas the construction portion is within GST. So with regard to land and with regard to completed building, no GST is being levied. So sale and purchase of real estate land is outside a GST. Sale and purchase, the sale of the completed building is outside GST, but construction of the buildings and the multiplexes are within the ambit of GST. So with regard to the entire ambit of real estate, the land and the completed building is outside GST, whereas the others are within GST, within the ambit of GST. Now, what will be the status in respect of taxation of above commodities after introduction of GST? So what is the case of alcohol? With regard to alcohol, central excise and VAT is levied? Yes. So before GST also VAT and central excise was levied. After GST also VAT and central excise. With regard to the petroleum products, before GST also VAT and central excise was levied. Now after GST also VAT and central excise was levied. Now with regard to land, sale of land, stamp duty was levied before GST. Now also stamp duty is going to be levied and there is no GST for sale of land. So what will be the status in respect of taxation of above commodities after introduction of GST? The existing taxation system will continue in respect of the above commodities. So whatever taxation system was there before GST would be continuing for those respective commodities. Now, what will be the status of tobacco and tobacco products under GST regime? So tobacco is a peculiar product. Tobacco and tobacco products are taxed both under GST as well as central excise. So this is very peculiar in nature. Tobacco and tobacco products would be subject to GST. In addition, the center would have the power to levy central excise duty on these products. So both GST as well as central excise is levied on tobacco and tobacco products. This is very peculiar to tobacco and tobacco products.